Hello everyone, this is Noor Musa.
I'm Alana Travers.
And welcome to the second season of Confused Iraqi.
And this is a very exciting day because it's actually Noor's last day in Erbil before she heads down to Najaf and then moves on to a very exciting new job. And I think you should talk about it briefly.
Yes, sadly, but happily also, I'm ending my journey in Kurdistan, Iraq, and also in Iraq, and moving to Yemen to continue to work in something I'm very passionate about, humanitarian advocacy. So it's something I've been looking forward to do during actually 4 years now, maybe 4 or 5 years. So it's finally happening, and I'm very excited for it.
It's brilliant and very well deserved. But of course, you'll be keeping your connections to Iraq. How can you not? And we decided recently to keep the Confused Iraqi project alive by doing the second season or series in which we a bit more kind of sporadically from time to time talk to different Iraqis from different places, parts of the country, parts of the world, and try to platform their experiences.
Exactly. Surprisingly, the feedback on the first season was good and people were interested to hear more. And what is better than allowing the space for other people to share their stories, because there is a variety of stories and reasons for Iraqis to be confused.
Exactly. And today we are both so excited because our first guest is a man, the first man on our podcast, and he's an incredibly talented man called Meethak Al-Khatib, who probably a few people listening to this, or maybe even more, will know because he's a hugely talented journalist in Iraq and a filmmaker who was born in Ramadi in the west of Iraq in the province of Anbar in 1997, and he grew up there. And we'll talk a little bit about what it must have been like growing up in such a fraught and violent place. He moved to Erbil, where we're having this conversation today, in December 2014 after, again, violence escalated and the threat of ISIS became ever more serious in the region. And he became, through almost accident, a fixer and a journalist who went on then to cover the Battle of Mosul. So he has been touched and impacted by so many parts of Iraq's recent history and has just the most incredible, harrowing and moving stories to tell. And we will introduce Meethak fully in a second, but I think we should couch a little bit of this context for listeners who don't know Iraq. Ramadi is a city on the banks of the Euphrates in western Iraq, and I actually came back from there a couple of days ago, so I feel much more emboldened to talk about it. Still overcoming the trauma of a brutal insurgency in the years following the 2003 invasion, and then most recently a 5-month battle to liberate the city from ISIS control after the militants captured the area in 2015, and millions of families, including Meethak's, fled the area, and thousands of homes, areas were destroyed to the ground. So it's both a historical and incredibly recently fraught area.
Thank you both for having me in your podcast, and I'm excited to see where this second season of Confused Iraqi will go, and I'm sure it's going to go far and beyond.
Thank you very much, Meethak. I think we've been knowing each other almost most of the time. I've been in Erbil. I don't know if it's the same case for you.
Yeah.
But I'm very surprised that you you agreed to be on the podcast. And I think I will start the conversation from there.
Well, of course, indeed, we've been knowing each other for really, really long time. I think since 2016-ish. At this, it's been couple of good years, and going on a podcast is something I like, and I like the idea behind your podcast, and I feel confused as you, and I think as many other Iraqis who would share the same feelings with us.
I know Meethak is a private person, and I know that you lived a very intense life. It's still short life. You're in your early 20s still, right? But there's so much to unpack today, and I'm very interested in you sharing. So I don't really know what is Meethak going to talk about, but me and Alana think we want to hear from you. Can you tell us a bit more about your childhood growing up in Ramadi and around the time when the war started, 2003 war started?
It is an intense period in not only in my life, but of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who this war impacted them in so many ways. It's not necessarily more impacting on you if you weren't in a heated battle area. It's just different extremes with this war that has reshaped our lives forever, and it's something that sadly we can never take back, and we can never rebuild what this war has taken from our lives and from our family lives. And growing up in Ramadi, I was like around 5 years old when this war started to take a place in my life. And I remember walking to the living room of our home in the early 2 weeks of March 2003, and I saw my uncle with a duct tape taping the windows of the living room, and I curiously asked why they are doing this, and he answered that he's putting tape on the window in case when the explosion's gonna happen, the window and the glass would not turn to shrapnel, and this duct tape can hold them. I didn't really comprehend what me and my family and my country gonna go through in the next couple of days that gonna change my life forever from this point.
Simple question: how did 2003 change your life?
Well, it has different layers. Every new era in my life, or new, when you're 16-year-old, your brain thinks differently, you see life differently. When you become 20, you see things more differently, and this is how this war have been. Every part that I go from my life, from childhood to teenage life to adult life to professional life, I have a different view of this war, and it's even like this. I'm 25-year-old now. It's worse than I even thought. How negatively this war impacted my life and my country. We will get into more details in depth in the episode, but just by seeing how 20 years after this war, Iraq is still a very in-functioning state. This is one thing just to tell for this part of the episode before we go deeper, that tells a lot about this war. This war, until today, didn't make Iraq a better country.
I think something I'd like to add is that from the sort of the Western perspective, a big narrative we were told, or rather my parents were told, is that the US is going to war in Iraq to rid the country of Saddam Hussein, and also we spoke about this in the 2003 episode, but to fight terrorists, right? And I mean, I think we both would really value hearing from you about sort of the growth of extremism in Ramadi, especially in Anbar, because actually that followed the invasion. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Al-Qaeda did not exist in Ramadi before. And of course, we all know ISIS took the city later on. Terrorism thrived. I think something that is missed a lot in the conversation about civilians in these areas is the sort of the constant balance they had to strike when both extremes were growing. And I think, anything you could talk about that would be incredibly interesting.
Well, we have to consider a few things before going directly to why these extreme groups has really had highly present in Anbar or in the Sunni areas mainly. We have to think about the Iraqis the war. Like, yes, Iraq went through a war with Iran, with Kuwait, but it wasn't door to door, a neighborhood to a neighborhood, street to street. Like, people were going through difficult times, like in the past, like 2 decades before 2003, but they didn't see their own neighborhoods being set on fire by rockets and airstrikes and soldiers breaking into their doors, searching their own bedrooms, going through their own clothes and memories that is in their own home where they should feel safe. Here, when you need hope to keep going. You need a hope to keep you sane in a times like this. And religion was the thing that could give this to people. Like, I remember a story where, like, the imam in our neighborhood would start, like, several imams would start to say, like, maybe this war is happening and we're going to do these hardships because we are not good Muslims enough. This is a test by God. And then we have to pray more, we have to be religious more, we have to cut things in our life. And this is where I started to see my own family becoming more conservative, becoming more like focusing into like more closed in phase in their life, and like we started to see this happening in the community. And talking about like fighting in Anbar, like insurgencies, or before Al-Qaeda started, or like everybody who hold arms, guns in this time. Like, I remember, for my vague memory at the time, like the insurgency weren't really religious in the beginning. The religion wasn't a thing to drive them. It's more like, fighting for the homeland. It's more nationalism, restoring the state, etc., etc. But then, how long this idea can keep you going before it runs out of motivation? And then here's again when religion come and give hope. And it was religion for Iraq, not because people are extreme. It was religion because people, this is what is the atmosphere here. This is what can give you hope. This is what you are familiar with in your life. And in France can be liberty. In other countries can be other things, etc. So, like, it just depends where you live. You will always find something to give you unlimited hope.
Yeah, and this is how you collect money to sustain war, like through religion, and you because what happened in that part of the country was also supported by other religious leaders from different countries and warlords. So it was also a way to maintain support financing.
Yeah, and there you see, like, just not the very home and the minds of people were changing, but their own hometown, like the repeat fightings that didn't stop, and Americans didn't even thought that this gonna even last longer. Like soldiers were like saying in various statements, testimonies, that they were staying longer than they thought. They are staying longer than they planned to be, and they didn't thought this, like, battle for Ramadi will last longer and having these insurgencies around.
I'd like to ask two questions. One is, in the immediate aftermath of the 2003 invasion, your family moved out of the city briefly. Can you talk about that? Secondly, I wonder whether you could explain to listeners how close your family home was to this massive US military base in the city, and the limitations that had for accessing your own home, and linked that this constant, as the sort of insurgency escalated, having to both deal with Al-Qaeda militants and the threat of US snipers, both in the same area. And whether that position was understood at all by coalition forces.
Like, when things started to escalate with insurgencies, existence of Al-Qaeda, American troops in the street. The Americans set up a military base next to our home, which was around less than 2 kilometers in the middle of a very populated neighborhood with civilians. They thought it's a good idea to have a base there. And Al-Qaeda, they were attacking this base on weekly basis, sometimes even 3 days on a row a fight will go in. And we decided to leave home and went to another small town called Heat, but we needed to go back home. Like nobody's working, no money left in the family. So we heard that some neighbors went back to the neighborhood. So we made the decision, me and my family, to make a white flag and walk together towards our home, hoping to reach it. We started walking. Everybody was silent. You could almost hear the breath of the people next to you as our neighborhood. This neighborhood that always busy with people and cars passing by, kids in the street, to like a ghost, silent town with even no bird would fly over it. And while we were walking, one of my brothers just freezed and he said, we gotta stop, we have to stop. And we said, like, what's happening? He said, there was a laser in my eye. And we said, are you sure? And while my father's trying to understand what's happening, he felt it too. And other members in the family felt there's like a shining laser hitting their eye. It was just a warning sign by a sniper in the base to tell us to turn back. We turned back. We asked around, and one of our neighbors said, hey, I asked the neighbor behind us in the other neighborhood to open sort of a door through their living room to access his own home. He advised us to ask the same to our neighbors. So we went there and we asked our neighbors and they agreed. And this is how we managed to go back to our own home, but in condition we should never open the front door. And I remember, because like if you walk in the main road where the base is, you could get shot. And there was no doubt about it. Like I remember after we did this like thing of accessing our own home, we went to our neighbors who were back first before us. And the father of the family said, you know what? I'm going to open the main door. I want to check my garden. I want to see my garden. And he get the hose of water. He want to just like take care of his garden. Like this old man just want to like put some water in the like trees that he have in the garden. And I said, you know, I'm going to stand with you. And in less than 5 minutes we are there. We hear like a whistle of a bullet that hits like the wall next to us. It was just a warning shot, like, no, you're not allowed this. An old man and a child in the street of their own neighborhood, it was a threat to this space.
Was that your first time seeing gunshot, or have you seen it before that?
No. Like, it was not the first time. I think the first memory of me ever hearing gunshots, it was like, again, like the first, like 2 weeks of the invasion, and like airstrikes were starting in around Ramadi to hit like strategic like targets to the Americans, like power plants, headquarters of Iraqi army, headquarters of security forces. At this time, I was like cuddled in my blanket, and I was like grasping my fingers on my blanket, covering myself with it, and unable to sleep hearing these airstrikes, and just my eyes was just wide open, staring at the ceiling. And this lasted for hours until I just fall asleep without even realizing.
And you had a younger sister who was a baby.
Yeah. My sister Warka was born in 2001. She was just like 2 years and a few months at this time.
And older siblings?
Yeah, I had like my older brother who was born in 1991 and an older sister who was born in 1996.
And earlier you were saying, and it's something I actually connected with, is the memory and how we reflect on 2003 as Iraqi change when we grow older. And so now our understanding and the way we feel about it is different from when we were younger. How do you feel about you having these early memories and what happened in your city, and what comes to your mind, or how do you feel immediately when you now currently?
Sometimes, even till today, I would remember new memories that I forget about entirely. And the first thing that comes to my head, that is not okay at all, that a child and his family would go through this. There is no excuse, no matter how the political situation was, no matter what the purpose of invading Iraq was, for good or for bad. It's not okay for a family like mine to go through what they went through.
And there was a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, from my perspective, because I think I said this before, but we were told, the troops are going in to try to fight the bad guys, etc., etc. But as a civilian family, and most people obviously were just civilians, you had to face constantly this threat of an Al-Qaeda militant knocking on the door and saying, "We want to use your roof," or but maybe you can explain this, because I think it's something that is so missed from the narrative.
There is this, like, our home was constantly searched by the Americans. Like, you could expect them in your home at 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, in the afternoon, at noon. They're just gonna come and go search, looking for insurgents, looking for guns, etc. But when you door knocks, it was not only the fear that American soldiers will go in, but also could be Al-Qaeda asking you to use your home to attack Americans. And if you say no, you're dead. And if you say yes, the Americans could airstrike your own home. And we had neighbors who like refused to let Al-Qaeda use their own homes as a base to attack on Americans, and they get killed by Al-Qaeda after. And there was this like trap where civilians were trapped in. You are so vulnerable that you have no choice, and either way you put your own life and your family life at risk. One incident that it keeps me some time awake at night thinking about it. In front of our home, the Americans had a tank to watch over on the neighborhood. And in one of the nights, Al-Qaeda attacked the base. And the guy on the tank started to shoot with his machine gun on every single home, including ours. Bullets from this machine gun were going inside our home. The flashbangs, the sound, the ricochet of the bullets going from the rooftop, penetrating the walls and the windows, falling in the hallway of our own home. I wonder where this guy is now. This guy who was on the top of a tank, shooting at our home and at our neighbors, where with his decision, these bullets fall into our own home. He will never be held accountable for the things that he did to us, this trauma that he left us in, the risk that he put us in. Maybe he's enjoying his retirement in New Jersey right now, being a war hero. But what about what me and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who are going through? It just, what breaks my heart most, at 20 years later, and no justice have been served to Iraqis.
not to disrespect what you and everybody in Iraq and went through, but I also think of us as humans. And I also now thinking of the war and what happened with the American soldiers also, who many of them, they said this is not what they signed up for. And that was a person in a panic mode, knowing that there are these men who believe in a certain thing he cannot understand, might just end himself immediately. I think this way of seeing things now only happened because I just, my thinking of 2003 has changed, and I started to realize like every human is different in their experience, even when they were on the other side. And sometimes I feel like, but it's still, exactly as you said, if justice has been served to my people and to the people of this country who went through a lot, it would be
easier to move on.
To move on and prioritize conversations on different levels.
The problem is, right, I don't want to speak from the international perspective, but what happened then got worse, right? I mean, maybe we'll talk about this later, but, you know, the Americans didn't win, right? The terrorists won, extremists won, they grew, you know, we all know about ISIS, and we'll talk about that. It's not a clear-cut situation, and you know, there was so much violence.
Like Iraq, like, this is one thing that I would think of. Like, Iraq before this war didn't have Al-Qaeda, didn't have this massive amount of corruption and destruction. But I also hate, some people will say that, would you rather to have Saddam instead? But was this thing that I've been cornered on.
Such a stupid question. And then,
like this thing where, as an Iraqi, you have two choices in your life, in your existence. Either you have a corrupted government and a brutal war, or a brutal dictator who will ruin your life. Like, I don't want neither.
And the arrogance with which people will ask you that, right, is unbelievable.
But it's people who ask this are people who never been affected by this war, who never felt the fear of there's going to be a tomorrow for them. It's going to be, is your dad going to go back home today? Is your mom going to be able to get to school safe? Are you going to be in your school safe today? This was like there was no prepare for tomorrow, because we didn't know if there was even tomorrow.
You were in year 3 at school when they found...
I remember, like, we were dismissed from a school. I was in the 3rd grade, and later on I heard that there was a mass grave of people who were buried in the schoolyard. And there's like the death, and like, I know this can sound hard, or these stories can sound hard, but this is the reality. This is the reality that this world and everybody who's like looking to understand Iraq, these deaths, these bodies that have been dismembered, shot in the street, left to be rotten, and their families like looking for them, living in a trauma, etc. These things are still in our minds. These things don't go away easily, especially when the country is going from worse to worse since this war started.
So, Meethak, all of that happened and you're still not even 10, I think. Were there any time where life was a bit stable, you could enjoy growing up in a normal setting?
You know, like, just to like finish up a little bit, after like Al-Qaeda was everywhere, there was this project called the Awakening Project, where Americans and Sunni tribes agreed on working together and to work with the new established Iraqi government after 2003 to work together and kick Al-Qaeda out of Sunni territories, including Anbar. In 2007, end of 2007, this project started to have real successes of not having Al-Qaeda in the city. So attacks have dramatically dropped, car bombs has dropped. Still, the country is not completely safe, but it's just not as bad as before. We still have some car bombs now and then, some attacks here and there, but it was not on daily basis. Like we can go out, we can go to a restaurant, have a dinner, we can start business, etc. So this is when, let's say, like, this part in my life was sort of normal, like the closest I ever felt to normal, from 2008 to end of 2013 when ISIS came. I was going to school, busy with my life, have a sense of normal worries. Worrying about my school, my family is worrying about renovating the house, my dad is getting a new car, and these worries where every normal family go through the hardships of life struggles, which
Normal life struggles.
exactly, and then, like, was good and quiet, but also the shadow of this conflict was always behind us. I am. There's just one story to give an example, where I was coming back from school, and I really loved my school. I loved my friends. I can play with other kids in my age. I can go out, etc. And sounded like we are over it. Sounded it's over. And I get back out of the school. I'm going out of the bus, walking back home, excited to have lunch with my family, etc. And my mom was so quiet, and she said, "Hey, there's something you need to know, but you need to remain calm." And he said, there was an explosion near your dad's work, and your dad is in the hospital. We're gonna go see him. He's been going through a few surgeries, and you will know more later. And I was like, I wanna know how it's going. I was probably 13, 14 at the time. And went to the hospital, and my dad was in the intense care unit. He had like several injuries in his leg, in his body, and as tough as this for a kid to go through this, but it was a reminder to tell us this war is not ready to let you go. This war is not ready to make you move on. And this attack has changed the life of my dad forever, and he kept suffering from consequences of his injury, and he survived. He was the only one who survived from the people who were near the bomb, and like some of his friends died, and it was just, we don't know until today, like we never get any answers. Who did this? Did the people who planned this bomb were held accountable for what they did? But it's like many other things that Iraqis go through. We just try to move on. I remember from the moment my dad injured and his long process of recovery and getting back on his feet, nobody asked who done this. Nobody was saying like, oh, we have to find out, we have answers. It's just, you arrive to a point where, so what? You are another person who get injured by an attack, like hundreds of thousands of others.
But why wouldn't the answer just be an obvious answer like Al-Qaeda or Khalas? Were there like information that there are others involved?
Like, there was so many groups there. It was not just Al-Qaeda. This was a way maybe by the Americans just to, simplify things. Just like, let's say, it's Al-Qaeda, but this was like dozens of different groups who don't associate themselves with Al-Qaeda. We managed to get back to our lives. Things started to become normal again. Like my dad get back to work. We forgot this. We didn't really forget, but that's
moved
it.
on.
We have to continue. We have to keep going, and then we had fun times. We had trips to do with the family, like in the countryside of Ramadi. We would have all these gatherings and celebrations, and Eid and Ramadan. We will be all together, and we still at the time wanting to feel normal again and to feel that we can just focus on our lives. But in end of 2013, and actually even before in 2012, we started to hear this world, the Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria, ISIS, and videos started to surface the internet of this new group who's making like a very visual videos that we never seen before, like Al-Qaeda. It was just like this shaky quality, bad produced video. They didn't care about how their videos look like. They were thinking by default people believe in them, but why wouldn't they believe in them in their heads? But ISIS came and said, no, we are gonna make it something that gonna not only make people believe in us, but make people want to join us, make people who even never thought of being a part of an organization like them will be interested after seeing this.
This is interesting for me because in the South, as someone in the South in Najaf, I saw these videos as a way of ISIS trying to spread fear and show themselves in a certain way where they become a concern for other people, cannot sleep thinking about them. But at the same time, for other people, it was like to attract them to join.
Exactly. It was a way to present themselves to Sunnis as their defenders. And just like Iraq, where Maliki was abusing his power, were like creating sectarism again in the country, abusing laws and discriminate certain groups over others. And this group was coming as a way to establish themselves within Sunni communities by the excuse of defending them from the Iraqi government and from al-Maliki, and to be a fear for others. And this is where you have the country splitting between people in the south is scared of these two groups, and this fear is being also grown by the way this government by Nouri al-Maliki, one of the prime minister who came after 2003, appointed by the Americans, supported by the Americans a lot.
Speaking of the devil, and during that time there was the protest. I remember it from not knowing lots about it, but
exactly. I went there actually to these protests in around 2012. So basically, it was like a massive protest that 6 Sunnis provinces in Iraq have started against the Maliki government, accusing them of corruption, abusing, targeting deliberately Sunnis, and using this law that called, it's the 4th chapter of the terrorism law that gives the authority to security forces and government persecutors to arrest and persecute people by the accused of terrorism. And Sunnis were believing this law have been deliberately misused to arrest Sunnis. People in Anbar started to get angry and pissed off hearing stories of people getting tortured, getting imprisoned, including women. And this is when protests started.
And they were peaceful protests at first.
at first was peaceful, but it was led by tribes. Tribes were not that unified in Anbar. Like everybody wanted to be the new Saddam in a way. In my opinion, the new Sunni leader who gonna get the Sunnis out of this hardship, and we didn't have like a very like a strategic way to where to get this. But yeah, it was peaceful, and for the record, we have rumors, or like we have allegations that tribes and these protests has collaborated with ISIS in a way or another. But I don't know how factual is this, but again, it's the abuse of power will lead groups and communities to even find it okay to work with terrorists just to avoid working with a new government. Like we have to, like nobody is good here. Everybody is evil. Everybody have done horrible things, but this atmosphere, this environment that was created after the invasion of 2003, how horrible it must have been, where entire communities will see a ruthless killers as an alternative.
Yeah. And I mean, you don't need to explain it, because, we know from the fact that ISIS, young Iraqis were recruited and they joined and they fought, and that was the best option for them at the time. And I think, you don't need to justify it. We can look at the reality of what happened and just feel very, well, mixed feelings, of course. I'm sure, obviously I've spoken to so many, particularly young Iraqi Kurds, who say they will never, ever understand, never accept, why anybody could ever join ISIS. But also we've got to, understand the reality, which you just talked about, which is that people are driven to do desperate things.
Fighting terror in Iraq, it's been always about fighting terror with terror. Fire with fire. I'm not saying that there should not be like military operations against terrorists, of course, but like entire communities were persecuted because members of them have joined Al-Qaeda or joined ISIS, which deliver more pressure that made other members of this community to join ISIS or Al-Qaeda. So like we have to understand fundamentally why young people or other people are finding these terrorist groups as an option. It's not as these groups are making their life any easier. And from Nur, corrects me if I'm wrong, but like in the end of the day, Iraqis has a very simple demands. They just want to have a home, has a functioning electricity, have a functioning job, and have their own kids around them, and like
the way
have a life.
Yeah, the way I see it is actually, and then we talked about this in the first podcast, is that Iraqis were never been heard, were never been involved, or even were part of the table. So I feel like when the protest happened in Anbar, I was in Najaf, and people weren't actually taking the side, or some of them were divided, but not really against so much. But the idea was, I was looking at the government of Iraq, the prime minister at the time, and then I was like, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? I was always shocked how he never wanted to listen.
Yeah.
He never wanted to listen. Just give these people some ears and just listen. Yeah. And that shocked me. And I still always feel like...
He was saying in several interviews that these protests are a bubble and they should end themselves before they be ended. There's like a prime minister who just excluded hundreds of thousands of people who've been striking and protesting for over a year, not in one province, but 6, including Mosul, Anbar, Salahuddin, and like Tikrit and other areas like how, if this is not a behavior of a dictator, what a dictator should be.
Yeah. And this is very sad, but I think this is something that we always remember at the moment that was shocking to me. When the protest was going, there was also elections after that, and then many people in my school, like I was in the university at the time, many people were like, okay, this is our first time we are able to vote. I was 18 at that time, so that was 2011.
Yeah.
And what happened is one of the girls was like, no, so who are you going to vote to? And I was like, I have this female candidate and I'm in mind. And she was like, oh, so you're not voting for Al-Maliki? I was like, no, I don't think so. She's like, who's going to protect us? I was like, protect us from who? And she was like, from Sunnis. I was like, they are Iraqis. And then it's like, you don't understand anything. Yeah. And I was like, that shocks me, because I always thought of Sunnis as like, these people struggled the most during the time that I was growing up in the country, and then they are not being heard. And how do we want a leader who only represents us? This was a moment for me, like, and that to realize, like, not all Iraqis want someone to present them all. Some want someone to present them only.
Again, like, the bigger picture of all of this is Iraqis just want to live. They just want to feel safe and protected. And having people like Al-Maliki and everybody who followed him.
Let's say still, an influential political figure who has, big sway in the country. And some people think may even,
like
go
having
back into that role.
Having people like him and people who come after him and before him are people who taking advantage of this need of Iraqis just to
benefit themselves,
feel safe and have a normal life.
So while you were growing up, you were seeing more and more of this new group, ISIS. Obviously, you left Ramadi and you didn't get caught up in that. And also, maybe that this is inappropriate to say, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that had you been born in a different family, other street, there is nothing necessarily that would have stopped another person in your situation from, joining ISIS. I mean to draw no parallels between your moral viewpoint. Maybe you want to disagree with that. I just would like to kind of stress the point that a lot of people were just born into situations that led them down a path that was obviously terrible and wrong and evil and violent. I don't know if you want to talk about people who were in that situation, or you just want to move on, or argue with me.
Well, in the beginning, I didn't leave immediately. When the war started, actually, I had to stay for over a year almost. And we had to leave our home again, and we had to hide in the very same room when we were hiding where the Americans were in our own home in Ramadi. And we run again to heat for another time. And again, going back what I said, like, this shadow of this war, these reminders of this war will always be there. And we had to leave our home again, had to be displaced again, and we kept changing homes, and many times we would wake up in the morning and we say, okay, it's time to leave. The fight is too close. The fighting is too close. And we'd stay in the neighborhood, around the fighting, but when it comes too close, we have to leave. And when I say too close, when it's 500 meters away from your home. And we lived in the neighborhoods where fights were a kilometer away. Bullets will hit our home sometimes.
And this is between the Iraqi army
and ISIS. And I knew people who joined ISIS, like classmates, neighbors, who were perfectly normal young man's, yes, frustrated, the lacks of opportunities, the unknown faith of their future is played a part definitely to make them join ISIS, to be like swallowed into this ideology. I'm not like taking the blame out of them.
No,
They
definitely
did decide to join this, but there is factors that should be taken considered. There's nobody who would wake up in the morning and say, yes, I want to join a terrorist group because why not? There is factors that affect people's life on the long term that pave the way for an environment where a young guy would come up with a decision to join groups like this. And our government and the coalition and the Americans and every country who promised to dedicate their financials and to dedicate their diplomacy and their power to build a new Iraq that has a place for everybody has failed us and failed the world. And they should be ashamed of themselves. Everybody who played the part in 2003 invasion has a responsibility to take of every young guy in this country who joined the terrorist group.
Because 10 years on it started again. I would like to just add 2 points of context. How roughly now you're 13, 14, 15?
I was 16.
16 by the time you left. So I'm just thinking from before. And you don't speak English?
I was learning. Like I started just a year before ISIS crisis started. I started to have a wider interest in learning English to have more understanding of the world, basically.
Yeah, and I just mean to mention that because it's so contextual, and basically what happened next is, if I can move us on a bit, you moved to Erbil.
Correct.
On your own, age 16.
Yes.
You'd never left Ramadi,
before.
well, Anbar before, in your entire life. And you left for a number of reasons, primarily security.
Well, primarily learning English, to be honest.
Okay.
Well.
Sorry.
Yes, the security situation was really, really tough. But like, I needed something to do. I needed to do. I wasn't able to go to school. I'm trapped again. Like in 2003, I have nothing to give me meanings, and just learning a language, going back to have classmates and being in a school was something that I really wanted. And I moved to Erbil to join an English school to just learn and practice English. And this is what opened up the way for me to become a journalist. I don't know if you want to speak about this.
I would love
point.
to, if I can, because just from everything I know about Meethak, and speaking obviously to him in English, and you're so incredibly knowledgeable about the world. And I mean, this is too, obviously, of course, there are so many people in Iraq who don't speak English, obviously, who are also so knowledgeable about the world. But it seems like this was a really quite a key turning point in your access to other
access to
views
information, access to point of views, and to learn how to put myself in other people's shoes in a way. And yeah, so I wanted just to practice my English. So after my family moved and joined me in Erbil, also it was a really tough journey for me and for them to get out in a city that is burning with war.
And you went back to get your family?
Correct. I like 2 weeks before ISIS completely controlled Ramadi in 2015, I came back and I told my family, you gotta join me, you gotta come back with me. And they come back, and 2 weeks after, the Ramadi was fully controlled by ISIS, so it was just luck.
And your home was destroyed?
Correct. Like, not only mine, the entire neighborhood was demolished to the ground by the fight. And then at this time, I really had the urge of like, I want to be part of what's happening. I want to be part of what's happening in this country, but I don't want to carry a gun. I don't want to like be again a part of a circle of violence that driven me in the first place to be out of my home. So I wanted another way of being a part of this and to be involved. So I started to work as translator for international journalists who's coming to cover the war. Later, I started to take the role of a fixer, which is kind of a producer where you take a music crew and then you have connections, you get them access, you help in producing the story. And then after like 2 years roughly, actually more than a year, less than 2 years, I decided to produce my first video as a journalist. And I started to work for small Iraqi British media as a freelancer, and I started to pick up more and more experience. I was mainly covering the Battle of Mosul. And
I have few, like,
yeah.
I'm confused now.
Yeah, sorry.
Because you were just learning English.
Correct.
And you don't have journalism background.
Yeah.
And you are new to the city,
Yeah.
don't speak Kurdish.
Yes.
And you're young.
Yes.
Why did they trust you? Like, why would somebody trust hiring you as a fixer?
You were 16, 17.
I believe 17
And
at
you-
the time
and-
where I started to work.
Where were you living, by the way? Can we
I
all
was
say?
living in a hotel.
Okay.
Because I didn't have a home, so it was like me and my family and many other families from Anbar and other towns who've been affected by the war are just renting hotel rooms.
Yeah, so just really don't understand, like, what took you that way and how people trusted hiring you and how did you deliver on that? Like, I just don't really understand.
Look, it's I know I just because of the time of the episode, I was like, jump me a bit from details. It was a long, slow process, huh? It wasn't just like immediately from Erbil to the war. I was doing small assignments in Erbil, like going to IDB's camp in Erbil, doing meetings with politicians in Erbil or IDBs who moved to Erbil, and slowly building this network to be prepared for covering Mosul. It took like work from 2015 until October 2016, where my network, my experience was just enough to start. I wasn't ready. I don't think I ever been ready, or nothing would make you ever ready to cover this conflict that happened in Mosul.
So tell us about it.
I remember the first day of the battle, which I didn't know it was the first day of the battle. It was just a coincidence. We were following.
What day do you remember the date of the...
Yeah, it was 16th of October 2016. This was the official day of starting the offensive for Mosul. So, going to the first day of Battle of Mosul, it was by a friend of mine who's an international journalist who had a meeting with the Iraqi army, and they told him that they are doing an operation on the 16th of October 2016 for the first day of Battle of Mosul. And he called me up. I was just at home in Erbil, and he said, "Hey, Meethak, there's this thing going with the Iraqi army. We should go." And we arrived there. We have to drive at night. We struggled to find them, and we did. And we were surprised that we were the only journalists there, because everybody was thinking that the Peshmerga would start first and pave the way to the Iraqi army, but nobody have been notified that the Iraqi army is doing their own operation as well. So we joined the 9th division of the Iraqi army, which was made of tanks. It was like an armored division. And the mission was to take 3 remote villages in the very, very outskirts of Mosul. We started to move at like 5 in the morning. Like, we slept in the car because we arrived to this like remote position that the army sat just to get ready to move in. So we slept in the car, and we waking up by the shakiness that we could feel, the vibration that you feel from the amount of tanks are moving at the same time. And so we left our car, we get into one of the tanks, and we started driving to this mission to take 3 villages. We arrived to the first village, and the village was empty with no people. It was booby traps with like bombs and IEDs, etc. We get to the second village, and this is when things started to become tough. Lots of resistance by ISIS and like Iraqi army was struggling to find what is the good way to get into the thick village, and the mission get extended for another like a day, and we stayed with them, and it was a bit rough. People were getting injured, things were not going as planned, and this was like like the start of another phase of this war, where again there's going to be suffering, again there's going to be people getting killed and shot. And when we finished and we managed to get back to Erbil, it was like me and my colleague were like very, very exhausted after these 2 days of like really rough battle. And on the radio they were saying, the second day Mosul battle is getting into the 3rd day, and this progress happening. And I look at my friend and I say, what? We were in Mosul battle? And he said, yeah, you didn't know? I said, no, I didn't know. It's just like another operation that because we kept following all these different fronts for like months and months and months. And for me, it was just another small battle to follow.
You were 17 at the time.
I believe I was 18. I was 18 at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
18. Okay, that would make sense.
And do you remember how the Iraqi army and the Iraqi fighters were? Like, were they afraid of fighting ISIS and having to confront them? Were they?
Well,
like, do you remember how they were?
Yeah, I mean, they had a mission. They were determined to go there, and they had a clear idea about who are like their enemies, and they were already fighting in many battles. So I wouldn't say fear, but I would say everybody has a concern in a way. Is this going to be their last battle? Are they going to get shot? I remember at the tank, one of the soldiers, like, he was checking his hour, and when it get to 7 in the morning, he called his wife and say, wake up the kids to go to school. And he was talking to his kids and say, come on, buddy, get ready, go to school. And he would not tell them he's going to a battle. He would say, we're just doing nothing. We're just like waiting. There's nothing is happening, etc. We're just evacuating people to camps, etc. And he said, I don't want them to be worried. But this war was chaotic. It was unfair to the civilians and to the soldiers. And it was just, I don't know how I can describe it, but it just had so much destruction, so much brutality in it.
How did it feel this time to be, obviously you weren't working with the forces, but you were embedded with them. And then, obviously the battle to liberate Mosul particularly had a lot of US coalition support.
Well, at the time, I felt that the coalition present is needed. I mean, if I like it or not, it's needed. I mean, Iraqi state didn't have enough jets to make airstrikes. They didn't have enough training. We saw that the Iraqi forces has collapsed in 2014. It was sort of regrouping them, rebuilding the army again. So it was just a long way of failure that reached this army, not because of the soldiers, but because of this corruption that infiltrated into the army, into the state, into every single corner of our lives. Like the moment where Iraqi forces couldn't defend Mosul, it's not because something happened at this week or this day. In my eyes, just years of failure, years of corruption, years of mismanagement, and years of misleaderships and abuses of power. And
For me, I feel like the Mosul battle and everything was just wrap up things, just wrap up things, and so many lives were lost, so
No,
much
no, no.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
Theirs was a goal. They won this like group to be ISIS to be determined, to be taken out by any cost. There was no consideration of heritage. There was no consideration even of civilians. And in some cases in this war, there was not a lot of things have been taken in place, even though the Iraqi government, of course, deny all of this.
And how do you feel? Because I always thought that it's interesting that being in a conflict zone, in an active war during the day and coming back to Erbil in the evening, which is like 1 hour drive.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
It was just so different. It's just so different. Like it's impossible how an 1 hour drive could take you from death to safety. Like just few kilometers where when like I would be agitated, stressed, like in in this mood where you are in the battlefield, and the moment we get to Erbil, we say, okay, it's time to take a break. It's time to like just eat and try to catch up some sleep before the next battle. And sometimes I would go back and then sleep 12 hours and get my things ready and go to another battlefield, stay a few days and come back, and on and on and on and on like this until until I just get so exhausted by the end of this war. Me and many of my colleagues were just mentally and physically so drained and exhausted because the things we're seeing there were just tough,
Can I ask a question about something which also is just for people interested in your kind of growth as a journalist and a person? You lived with a lot of international journalists.
Correct.
In Erbil, in a house which you guys are kind of called the French house.
Yeah.
And actually there's a comic book being written about this. So listeners can read more about Meethak's life soon. But I wonder how influential this was also to shaping your views.
Yeah. Definitely, like this group of friends, and now they are like my family, where we still in touch to the very day. We meet each other, we travel to different countries just to see each other from now and then. And this house was like made of like, I don't know, me and like 9 different international journalists who were mainly French, and we were like all covering the Battle of Mosul. So being a fixer, living in a house that's full of journalists, I would never run out of work. There's always somebody
knocking on your door.
Like you'd be eating your lunch and somebody comes and say, hey, we need to go to this battle. And I said, sure. And then you would be just lying on the couch and somebody say, I want to get hold of this general on the phone to get some information. I said, sure. I pause my video game and like make a call and say, this happening. And like, yeah, we had a lot of memories with this house, good ones, bad ones. We all were learning from the country and learning from each other's and teaching each other's. I learned a lot from my friends at this house. I learned how to be objective, how to criticize, how to look at things differently and have like more skills on how journalists should be done, etc. And so this house and this group of friends had a huge impact of what journalist I become and what person I become after with the battle itself.
I think we can speak a lot about the stories people you met from the battle and Mosul and everything, but let's just to bring more focus on you also. What do you think the identity is now of that guy from Ramadi? How do you connect to that guy from Ramadi now? How would you describe yourself now and your journey, the way it shaped you as an Iraqi? But I don't know it would be interesting to hear from you.
Well, I don't want to make this dramatic in a way, but if I connect to my 5-year-old in Ramadi, I cannot help it to feel the child of me was just a victim of many others. And I cannot help to keep sympathizing with this kid who just had so much things changed in his life because of this conflict, this war, these consequences that I live, me and you, Noor, and many others in it because of few mans in power in Washington, D.C. decided this is the good thing to do. This is the good thing to go and invade a country. And I just wish things were different. I want things to be different, but it just reality has to be just accepted.
A follow-up question is, so what would make things different now? What would fix things for you? Do you think what would be the solution now?
Well, sadly, I wish it was like this. I wish it was black and white, where yes, if I get this thing, it's gonna be better. I think it's within me, within my family, within hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, where this part we get from this war will always be with us, will always make us different, will always take things out of our lives, will always make us be different people.
And you were more aware during the ISIS conflict, but I don't know, through this conversation, I feel like the most impact was from the 2003 war. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong.
No. Don't mistake me. Like the war with ISIS has a huge impact in my life. But just after now, the anniversary of the 20-year, I think everything is linked to this war. The day that I become a war journalist to cover Battle of Mosul, it's linked to this invasion. So like, it's like the starting point. If this invasion didn't happen, I could be, it could be like finishing my uni, getting a job, or like having a completely different life. There will not be Mosul, there will not be ISIS, etc. So everything for me and what will happen for me in the future is because of this invasion. This is what I realized this year on the 20th anniversary.
I think maybe it's worth saying, you've chosen not to go back to Ramadi and you want to stay in Erbil, or at least you've been in Erbil almost for 10 years, right? So,
yeah. I mean, as I started my career here as a journalist, I wanted to follow up on Mosul and the life of people after the war, especially youth. So I decided to stay and build a life here in Erbil, where it can be my base to cover Mosul and other parts in Iraq.
And do you see your long-term future here?
Sadly, I don't believe so. Like, the country is getting worse and worse on a lot of aspects. Mainly for my side is the freedom of expression and freedom of journalism. The amount of censorship, harassment that journalists are getting in the country is getting higher and in very concerning way. We have been seeing many colleagues who've been threatened, kidnapped, assassinated in the last few years. Iraq is being considered one of the most dangerous countries in the world for journalists and to practice journalism. And sadly, I'm still trying to fight it. I'm still trying to bring stories from Iraq, but in one point the pressure is just too high, and there is not much in my hand to do. So I think me, and sadly a lot of other colleagues and very, very talented people that I learned a lot from here in the country are coming to the same realization that they have to leave the country in one point.
But would Iraq leave you, you think?
Definitely not. No, like this. I think me and many others who would leave the country looking for a better life, they'll spend the rest of their life sad about what happened to Iraq and thinking about what could have been done, what could they have do to make it better, and they can just live maybe most of their life just overthinking and struggling to understand. It's better to be depressed and overthinking in a safer country. When
you can somehow at least you feel like it's safer to invest in a more stable life.
Exactly.
Because you've seen your family and what they went through. You don't want. This is a bit taking us away from the conversation, but just for me to know, as an Iraqi, sometimes you want to sleep or you have a dream that is actually more like a scary nightmare thing. So for me, it's always like in a school, ISIS attack, or some people who are fading their face attack the school. This is something always I think of. Do you have something, an image that always freaks you out?
Well, it's multiple. But I think what all this years, what affected me the most is the mental health struggles that I go through, and I'm sure a lot of Iraqis share this with me, that the feel of unsafe, the feel of uncertain, the feel of, again, we go back to the same moment after 2003. Will you be back home tomorrow? What will happen this day? What could, like, so many things can go wrong. Even like, I'm not trying to give the wrong image. Iraq now relevantly safer than years before, and people are having their life going, etc. There's things are working in the country, but like, it's me who still the shadow of this invasion follow, and the persecution and the unfairness and injusticeness and the pressure of freedom of expression is always make me feel unsafe.
I feel like we could have these conversations for hours and hours long. I'm very curious about the stories you managed to cover, because I know that you've been working on stories related to people who are firsthand impacted by the conflict, like IDPs, refugees, children. You've also worked with children, and you've worked across the country on different issues, even including climate change, mine action, and so many things, actually. Meethak,
we'll link them all.
Yes. But,
we'll link his website.
Yeah. But actually, for me, this is it was a very nice conversation to get to know Meethak a bit more on the human side.
It was very nice for me to join you too, and I really would like to see where this project of yours will go, and of course I wish you all the best for it.
Thank you. We just wish that more stories are being told and heard, hopefully.
And we hope we'll do that. We'll do more.
Yes. Thank you very much, Meethak, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.